Welcome back to the Global Business Report here on the Rise News. Nigeria's Minister of Power, Adebayo Adelabu, has affirmed the federal government's dedication to supporting local meter manufacturers, aiming to enhance local content development and stimulate industrial sector growth. Now, the minister pledged his backing for domestic manufacturers during his working visit to local meter manufacturer Memcol in Mowe, Ogun State. The minister also said the presidential metering initiatives plan to install 2 to 2.5 million meters yearly for the next 5 years. Now, it should be recalled that back in November of 2023, Nigeria's Vice President Kashim Shettima inaugurated an electric LNG metering manufacturing factory in Orafite, a Kusigo local government area of Anambra State. Speaking during the inauguration at the factory's premises in Anambra State, the vice president said the energy factory, called Advanced Energy Management Solutions, would help the federal government in its efforts to address the power challenges in the country by helping reduce the meter shortage gap. Now, back to the Minister of Power. Minister Adelabu has confirmed the federal government's strategy to escalate the electricity generation capacity from 3,500 megawatts to 6,500 megawatts within the next 3 to 6 months. Now, Adelabu, while on a working visit to different power projects in Lagos, stated that the objective was to improve the power supply nationwide to satisfy the increasing energy needs. So, how can we close this gap? We're happy to be joined by Mr. Odion Omonfoman, who is the CEO of New Hampshire Capital Limited. Thank you so much for joining us. The minister says that government is going to patronize local manufacturers, as if there are lots of them already, and we're choosing to patronize foreign manufacturers in favor. What do you make of this initiative of his to try to patronize them? What does that even mean?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good call to try as much as possible to domesticate some level of meter manufacturing in the country, within the country. There's an argument that what you have in the country are mainly meter assemblers. I will sort of concur with that because there's a level of precision manufacturing that we don't have in the country. So what we have right now are parties that import SKDs or CKDs into the country, and then they assemble them, calibrate them, and then that is what typically passes for what we call local manufacturing. But don't get me wrong, meter assembly is also part of the manufacturing process. What we just don't do here is the design of what you call the printed circuit board, PCB. That is the heart of any electronic system, where you have to design that plastic, and then you do your SMT, surface mounted technology, where you put all the bits, solder, wet them. That's the heart of any electronics, and we don't do it here. So all the components are imported either as semi knockdown parts or completely knockdown parts, and then assembled here. So that's really what we do here. But I think it's a good idea, at least, even if it's that level of work we do here. Yeah, that's fine.
Okay, so in fact, you already preempted this, but a couple of tweets from the founder of Nairametrics. Because Nairametrics posted the story on Twitter on their website, and then Ugo Obichukwu, who responded to this. And I'm not sure if this was sarcasm, but he said, please name a local meter manufacturer that you know, and that's responding to the Nairametrics story. Yeah. And then, after that, he says, and I think this was what you just said, don't confuse meter manufacturing with meter assembly. So is he alluding to the fact that there are not that many meter manufacturers in Nigeria, or none at all?
Again, if you say meter manufacturing, maybe you're referring to the complete chain, and that includes the first step, which is the design of the PCB. That's the heart of any electronics. I don't know of any firm that does it here, but I know a number of companies have tried to put that machine in place. But you must understand that even with our huge metering gap, unfortunately, Nigeria is not such a huge metering market. So if you have that technology, you should be churning like 2 to 8 million meters for exports as one company.
Wow.
Right? So it's a very expensive piece of technology, and then you have to get all the parts components. There's a lot of procurement that goes with it. So I think for now, let's do the easiest. Let's assemble these things. Assembly is part of the meter manufacturing process, but we may not have the precision manufacturing technology to compete with China or India.
Yeah. So with the vice president, last November, where he inaugurated this meter manufacturing plant in Anambra State, I guess, is this just the baby steps, and hopefully we get more of these. I know you weren't there, so I don't know what you think of the capacity of this place, but is this the first step? What do you make of this inauguration in Anambra?
Well, the company is not the first meter manufacturing company we would have. As a matter of fact, in the days of NEPA had what you call the MCON in Kaduna. So MCON used to make the meters for NEPA, right? So NEPA had its monopoly assembly or meter assembly company. Yeah. Currently, we have about 35, 39. But you must understand, again, there are some very big ones. I think that's one of the big ones that the vice president must have commissioned. And then there are other small ones as well, small players. And to be classed as a meter manufacturer, all you need to have is like an assembly bench and then a test bench that can do maybe 24, 48 meters every 2 hours to calibrate it, and then the assembly. But most important thing is your ability to import the CKDs or SKDs, as the case may be, and then have them assembled locally. So it's not really such a big technology process. Yeah. But looking at the picture that you just put up, it looks like the Orafite factory might be a bit more complex. Okay. Maybe we might check if it has an SMT machine. If it does have an SMT machine, then perhaps they do manufacturing.
Gotcha. What do you make of looking at the statistics, the numbers for the last, the metering gap, I guess also the number of meters that we have in the country. So total customers, which I actually got confused by this. I was counting individuals, it's households. 11.7 million total customers, a 7% climb. Metered customers, 5.6 million. And estimated billing, I guess, about 6 million or so. Those figures, does that show us how far do you think we have to go to close that gap?
Well, sadly, we've not moved from where we were 2003 when the reform started, because I stumbled on a report done by a company for the USAID and for NEPA, and then NEPA's metering gap was about the same size, and then NEPA was looking for to procure 2 to 3 million meters. So 21 years after, we're still at that same gap, that same metering deficit. And when you really interrogate the numbers, the 5.7 million metered customers, you're not counting the meters that are going obsolete or that are even obsolete, that need to be changed. So by the time you account for that obsoleteness, you might have even more gaps. And also remember, customer growth is high. Look around you, estates, people are building. These people need meters. So unfortunately, I don't think we've moved very fast despite privatization. And it's very sad because metering is perhaps the lowest hanging fruit you can solve in the power sector. And unfortunately, it's the cash box of the sector. So if you don't solve it, you probably have the liquidity challenges that you currently have.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so now that being said, the minister is looking at 2 to 2.5 million meters being produced annually over the next 5 years. What do you make of that goal? What would have to happen for us to get there?
Well, first of all, I think it's a good idea to try and promote local content. But the question I'd ask myself is perhaps the most important thing is even closing that gap. Yeah. Because even if you're going to do 2 to 3 million assembled meters locally, you still need funding to get the components in. Yeah. Is there funding available for it? And when I mean funding, I'm not talking of Naira funding. You have to go get this components offshore. The other thing is that at the end of the day, it's about, I think there's enough capacity to meet that target, but I would struggle to see where the funding will come from, given the fact that you have a situation where discos are technically bankrupt. The federal government is still trying to close out subsidies in the sector, and then you're about to fund metering. We've seen how previous metering financing by the government has gone. It's not closed out anything. So I'm just a bit curious that perhaps what we need to close the metering, maybe the minister's focus now is how best to close the metering gap, as opposed to manufacture or assembly of meters locally, because we're losing 1.6 trillion. The subsidy every year is 1.6 trillion. Wow. You want to continue that, or you want to see how you can plug that leak. Yeah. But I applaud the minister for even looking at local content. But at the end of the day, it's how fast can we close the metering gap for
Okay, so to that effect, and thanks for mentioning the funding challenges, they're looking at 200 to 350 billion, and they're saying the federal government is going to put down 75 billion of seed capital. So I guess to your point, where does the difference now come from? Is it, borrowing private sector? How do you think that's going to work?
Well, frankly, I don't know where the government is going to get the balance.
Yeah.
But I know one thing. You and I, we currently pay for meters.
Right.
So there's what NERC has called, there's a charge that NERC has now put in your tariff. It's called the Meter Acquisition Fund. It's about 1.80 kobo per kilowatt hour that you pay. Whether you're metered or not, whether you're on estimated billing or not, whether you bought your meter or not, you're paying that. And if you looked at the total collections on a per annum basis, maybe total collections would be like 50 billion per annum.
Right.
So maybe that's what the minister is referring to. But the question is that the only way to look at this thing? We need to, I just feel the metering problem is a regulatory problem.
Right.
And not necessarily a funding problem, because you already have what you call the Meter Asset Provider Scheme, where customers have funded almost 3 million meters off from their pockets.
Right.
And their customers, based on my analysis, at least 2 million customers that will readily pay for their meters, because guess what? It's cheaper than paying estimated bills.
Right.
So they'd rather pay and close that chapter. I paid for my meters. I knew a lot of people that pay. So perhaps maybe we need to switch the metering solution to say, look, rather than discos being responsible for providing meters, obviously they can't, that's why the federal government is coming, put it as part of the customer's obligation. So that if you want to be connected to a utility, then go buy your meters. It's simple as what we have as our cell phone. If you want to be connected to a network, you buy your cell phone. Right. We have almost more than 200 million cell phones. The cell phone is more expensive than a meter.
Right.
This cell phone will buy about 10 meters. No jokes.
Yeah.
About it. People are carrying it.
Right,
So
right.
why is it that the cash box of the industry, we are waiting for federal government to fund, and then we're all suffering the problem? Because the more leakages you have, the more tariffs become high. So it punishes all of us. So I think the best way is to maybe have a complete paradigm shift as to how we look at this whole thing, as opposed to discos or utility being responsible. They can't. Put it on the customers as part of the customer's obligation. And then where customers can't fund, then you can then see these interventions that will support the customer direct, as opposed to this blanket funding programs that are meshed with all form of corruption, inefficiencies, and then you still haven't solved the problem.
The minister also said that they're trying to get to, he says he informed the discos that they want to get to 6,500 megawatts between the next 3 to 6 months. What do you make of that target?
Getting to 6,500 megawatts is easy. We already have we have generation capacity in excess of 13 gigawatts, right? The problem is that 6,500 megawatts, are you getting it on an hourly basis consistently? So I've always queried the issue where people look at Nigeria's power problem as a generation issue. It's not really a generation issue. How much of that generation do you get consistently? In other words, kilowatt hours do you consume on a consistent basis? So you can have transmission. I read the news. TCN can now wheel out about 8,000 megawatts of energy. Yeah. But the question is, how long can discos take 8,000, even 5,000 megawatts and sustain it? 2 hours, 3 hours, 5 hours. So that's where the work is. Until you can say, I would like for the minister to change his mindset to say, look, until Rutus, or rather the whole country can be doing, say, 150 gigawatts of energy supplied, consumed. That should be his metric, not the capacity, generation capacity. It should be the number or the amount of energy we consume. That should be the metric. And that means that once you look at it from that perspective, you would have addressed generation capacity, you would have addressed the transmission capacity, and then the biggest issue, you'd have addressed the distribution capacity, because the distribution infrastructure has to be strong for you to have that level of energy consumed. Right?
That comes back to the meters.
That comes back to the meters.
Yeah.
So if that energy is not, if you increase the energy intake and you don't meter it, then there's a loss all over again, because the bottom side, the revenues don't flow up to support it.
Mr. Odion Omonfoman, the CEO of New Hampshire Capital Limited, thank you for a very in-depth discussion on Nigeria's power issues. We appreciate your time.
Thank you very much.
You're watching the Global Business Report here on Arise News. We'll have more for you after the break. Do stay tuned.